President Trump famously rated Morning Joe speaks badly of me. Don't watch anymore. Then how come low IQ Crazy Mika along with Psycho Joe came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row around New Year's Eve and insisted on joining me? She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no. Earlier on America's Newsroom, Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders defending her boss's right to respond to his critics.
I don't think that the president's ever been someone who gets attacked and doesn't push back. There have been an outrageous number of personal attacks, not just to him, but to, frankly, everyone around him. People on that show have personally attacked me many times. This is a president who fights fire with fire and certainly will not be allowed to be bullied by liberal media and the liberal elites within the media or Hollywood or anywhere else.
This morning, Brzezinski said the president is destroying the country, called him a liar, and made fun of his hand size. Joe Scarborough responding to the president with retweets of people questioning whether Mr. Trump's tweets are below the dignity of the office. Governor, do you defend this move by the president?
Everybody who knows Donald Trump, certainly those of us who ran against him in the primary, should know that Donald Trump made it very clear, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back 10 times harder. Anyone who didn't get that message loud and clear in living color was not paying attention. Am I saying that I would have said what he said in the tweets? No. But let's be a little fair here. He was called on television by Morning Joe a schmuck, a goon, a thug, deranged, incapable of holding the office. I mean, those are some of the nicer things that he was called. So you don't say those things about the President of the United States, especially when that President happens to be named Donald J. Trump, and expect that he's going to say, oh, no biggie.
If you were advising him, would you advise him to take the route he did?
I would be happy to advise him. Now, keep in mind, he's sitting in the Oval Office and I'm sitting on the couch. So obviously what he did...
Which is a much better place to be.
Yeah, well, but what I'm saying is it has worked for him that wouldn't have worked for most of us because it's not our personality. It is his personality.
Megan?
Okay, so the first thing I want to say is this show, Morning Joe, has personally attacked this show, and I was very offended by the comments they said about this show, so I'm going to start right there. So I'm not a fan of theirs. That being said, I woke up this morning and I actually kind of misread it to begin with, and I was grossed out because I think talking about women and cosmetic surgery in general is just stay away from it. Don't ever talk about that if you're a man in general. I do believe this is beneath the dignity of the White House and the presidency. I think we have so much going on with health care, with Russia, with North Korea. These are the issues I would like to focus on. It changes the narrative. And me, I'm 32 years old. I've been working in Republican politics my entire adult life. I have a concern about the next generation of women coming to my party and seeing beyond gender politics. Yes, this election showed that gender doesn't mean everything, which it doesn't. But I don't want to be seen as a party that somehow isn't respectful towards women. And when you send tweets out like that, I don't like it. Women are entitled to get cosmetic surgery if they want. I don't give a hoot if she has or if she hasn't. But bringing it up in a way to sort of try and diminish her and humiliate her publicly, I think makes everybody across the world look bad, across the country look bad. And for me personally, it makes my job talking to millennial women about politics, specifically about why they should become conservatives, much more difficult.
Many Republicans are speaking out saying they just didn't think it was the right way for the president to respond. Senator Ben Sass, the Republican from Nebraska, tweeted this: "Please just stop. This isn't normal and it's beneath the dignity of your office." Trish?
It is beneath the dignity of his office. Absolutely. I mean, okay, I'll give you that maybe they haven't been so nice to him.
Right.
But, you know, I'm sorry, you're President of the United States. You signed up for that. You have to be able to take the hits and do so in a dignified fashion. For him to come out and say that, I, like you, Megan, I mean, as soon as I saw the word bleeding, I flinched. And he just took it too far. There are ways to get your message across where you do not stoop to that level, and that was not necessary.
Lindsey Graham took on a similar approach, said this just isn't the way to respond to this. Your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think the collective sentiment is, come on, man. I mean, seriously, he's already had enough problems talking about bleeding with blonde female news anchors. He doesn't need to continue this narrative, and it's a giant distraction. I love sick burns on Twitter. I love getting back at people. It's one of the funnest things ever. But to Trish's point, I'm not president of the United States. If you're going to run for office and if you're going to ascend to the presidency, sometimes people are going to say the meanest things about you, and you have to take it.
I'm sorry, but we have a first lady whose platform is cyberbullying. It's a very real thing. teenagers commit suicide around the country over being cyberbullied. We have a president who is doing that and a first lady who it's her platform. It looks hypocritical that he's still doing this while it's our first lady's platform. So the idea of sick burns, Kennedy, it actually can be quite more serious.
But to wrap it up with the words
however,
that...
a comeback every once in a while when someone attacks you is appropriate.
To wrap
and
it
there's
up
a
with the
difference
words
between that and bullying.
This, to me, falls in the category of cyberbullying.
Okay, I agree with you. That's why I'm condemning it. But also, this is like, to your point, this is like George W. Bush burning down libraries.
Your daughter said it. This is a president that fights fire with fire.
He does.
We'll leave it there.
And I think that's what
and she has the hardest job
expect.
in politics.
It's not an easy one. You can't. And she didn't defend what he said, just his right to fight back, and which is what he did. I wouldn't recommend that he would do it that way every time.
All right, Proud Papa over here.
Nevada is gearing up for the legalization of recreational marijuana to take effect July 1st. A ballot measure in the 2016 election paved the way for the new law, with 55% of Nevadans voting in favor. But regulations have been added onto the rollout.
Huge step for Nevada and for the country, in my opinion. But question 2 does prohibit public consumption of cannabis, so that is not allowed. Additionally, here in Clark County, where the Las Vegas Strip is located, we have an ordinance here in the county that prohibits use in casinos and hotels, gaming properties.
Dispensary owners say recreational sales will offset sluggish medical sales. The Nevada State Legislature passed a law allowing medical marijuana in 2013.
I think people, like I said before, are just very nervous about the rollout. You know, when medical first started, you know, people thought that the sky was going to fall, the cartel was going to come, you know, and none of that happened.
Some critics of the law think the rollout is happening at too fast of a pace.
And that was the understanding here when people voted on question 2, that there would be a 1-year gap, if you will, between the formal legalization and the commercialization. That didn't happen.
Nevada joins 7 other states plus the District of Columbia for legalized recreational marijuana, and come July 1st, anyone over the age of 21 can legally possess an ounce, much like you see in my hand right here. In Las Vegas, Andrew Kraft, Fox News.
Cosmopolitan magazine coming under fire for a recent article highlighting 7 women who could be America's first female president. The problem, no Republicans were included on the list. Instead, they named Senators Tammy Duckworth, Kristen Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, and Amy Klobuchar, and Elizabeth Warren, none of whom have been in the Senate longer than 6 years. The writer even including progressive public figures Sheryl Sandberg and Oprah Winfrey. National Review responding with a blistering editorial pointing to conservative women like Maine Senator Susan Collins, who's been in Congress for over 2 decades. Nikki Haley, a former governor and current U.S. ambassador to the United States, Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, and Carly Fiorina, former Hewlett-Packard CEO and 2016 presidential candidate. You know, Governor, I have written for Cosmo magazine before, and I can't say that they're completely anti-conservative, but when you put a list together like that and you don't even include one conservative woman on it, what message does that send to the young Republican women in this country who may be reading this magazine?
Well, I've posed for Cosmo, so I'm that's an issue that did not sell. I mean, this is so expected that liberal publications tend to think that we don't exist, that conservative people, and in this case conservative women, don't exist, so they're just not going to list them. And I think it's unfair to their readership, it's unfair to America, but frankly it doesn't bother me because Cosmopolitan will have very little to do with electing the first female president. That's for sure.
That's one, I don't know what their political influence is. Are you surprised by this, Kennedy?
Oh, no. Good Lord, no. I mean, this stuff has been happening since the early 90s. But, you know, throw potentially half of your readers a bone because, believe it or not, like maybe some of the young women who read your magazine grew up in conservative families. Maybe throw in a pro-liberty name in there. Or even Peggy Noonan. I love Peggy Noonan. No one ever talks about Peggy to be president of the United States. She's a fantastic writer. So each party is eager to pin the failure on the other, and who loses? People who are losing their shirts. Absolutely.
Yeah, Americans.
Yeah,
if they don't fix it. There's no
American
doubt about that.
people lose.
That's a better point. Politically, the Republicans lose, but the real losers indeed are the American people, many of whom will have expectations and hopes that they elected Republicans because they thought they would get something better, and if they don't, they're going to be justifiably angry when they go to the polls next year.
So is it fair to say that you're open to the idea of working together, you just don't see that that's possible at this point in this political
Working together would make sense if both sides would approach this differently. They're both approaching it horizontally. They're both looking at this as an issue of left, right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. That's the failure. They need to look at this entire debate vertically. They need to ask, is it better or worse? Does it take us up? Does it take us down? Health care is ultimately a pragmatic issue. It is not a philosophical issue. And if they take the philosophical bent out of it and quit making it a political football to see this is more conservative because it cuts cost, or this is more liberal because it adds cost. The question is, what is our end game? That's what I don't hear anyone say.
Yeah.
What is the ultimate purpose for this? And that's where Republicans could take the lead and say, this is how we want to end up.
But where do you blame that leadership? Do you put this at the knees of Mitch McConnell? Who ultimately do you think is responsible for this?
I think it's a combination of both McConnell and Ryan. They've had 7.5 years to start working on this, and they shouldn't be now scrambling around for it. You know, you can say, well, the president, and certainly he's going to have an increasing level of responsibility, but I think, you know, he's been president 6 months barely, so you can't expect him to have it all figured out just yet. But I'm going to say once again, I don't think Washington can or will fix this. Punt the ball, give it to the 50
okay,
states.
but let's not forget, if we don't get this done, what happens to tax reform? What happens to that infrastructure bill? I mean, there are consequences to not getting this done.
They should have done those two things first. Those were less complicated. Those were less controversial. They should have approached those first, had the victories, and then go to health care.
Welcome to the Clapback with Julie Roginski, where we take Twitter back from the trolls. And here in the Clapback, we also call out bad grammar, but my friends, the time has come to call out bad math. Let's look at this tweet from the White House. Quote, fact, when Obamacare was signed, CBO estimated that 23 million would be covered in 2017. They were off by 100%. Only 10.3 million people are covered. And I clapped and added back, quote, good Lord, spin aside basic arithmetic evades these people. 100% of 23 million is, drumroll, 23 million. Then the mathematicians came out. The tweets to me were a lot like, quote, are you really that dense? 10.3 versus 23 is what percentage, Sparky? Well, Sparky is a new one, and I responded, about 45% Sparky. Unlike whoever came up with that statistic at the White House, I actually completed the 4th grade. Let me respond with more than 140 characters. Monday's Congressional Budget Office analysis found that if the Senate bill were enacted, and let's not forget, this is the same CBO the White House quoted, 22 million fewer people would have health insurance over the next decade. That's in part due to the bill's rollback of the Medicaid expansion, and Republicans, who are the once so-called advocating for blue-collar workers, who are the backbones of our society, yeah, that would be taking critical health care away from them. Here's the deal. Medicaid is not for these welfare queens that Republicans love to sit there and talk about, these lazy, able-bodied people, men that Kellyanne Conway talked about. They're actually about people like our grandparents who need it for nursing home care, or for the working poor who are working in jobs that don't provide health care and they don't earn enough to buy health care otherwise. It is for people who are trying to get ahead or towards the end of their life, who are just trying to live out the rest of their life with dignity. So let's be very clear about whom these people are hurting. They're not hurting the Republicans, the people who live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Trump Tower. They're hurting people in their own constituencies. Mitch McConnell, you're hurting people in Kentucky. Rand Paul, you're hurting people in Kentucky, although Rand Paul opposes this bill. John Cornyn, you're hurting people in Texas, the people living in Amarillo, Texas, and others. You're hurting your own constituents, the people that put their trust in you. And Donald Trump, that's your base. But let's get real. This is your health care on the line. Do the research. You will very likely be impacted if this bill passes. Lifetime caps on benefits, the fact that you will actually be able to be discriminated against in some places for pre-existing conditions. See how, and let your lawmaker know how you feel. 202-225-3121 is a congressional number, as the House of Representatives and the Senate. Call them up, ask to speak to your congressman. Speak up and clap back. And now, actually, for some personal news. Today marks my last episode of the Clapback and my last week at Fox. Hopefully you learn words can cut really deep, but you can also stand up to trolls, teach them something bigger, and be the bigger woman. I have been here at Fox News for a very long time. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed you. Thank you so much for watching the Clapback. Thank you so much for watching me on TV all these years. One of the joys in my life was interacting with you, whether it was agreeing with you or clapping back at you. So for Fox News, this is the Clapback with Julie Roginski.
two bills up for a vote this week, Kate's Law and the No Sanctuary for Criminals Act, will help Immigration and Customs Enforcement uphold our nation's immigration laws and help make our communities more safe. President Trump has been clear that our borders are not open to illegal immigration, that we are a nation of laws, and we will no longer look the other way. Well, we will no longer look the other way in the interior either. Since the President's executive order on immigration enforcement were signed, ICE has arrested nearly 66,000 individuals who are either known or suspected of being in the country illegally. 48,000 of those individuals are, in fact, convicted criminals. Many of the rest were charged with crimes, often multiple ones, or had gang affiliations. So far in FY 2017, ICE Homeland Security Investigations has over 32,700 criminal arrests. The crimes include illegal gang activity, child exploitation, human trafficking, narcotics trafficking, financial crimes, and many, many others. I appreciate Congress's effort to address the dangers of sanctuary cities and illegal immigrant offenders. As I have said many times before, DHS does not make the laws, Congress does. And we will enforce the laws that are passed by Congress. And I am offended when members of this institution exert pressure and often threaten me and my officers to ignore the laws they make and I am sworn to uphold. Mr. Speaker, Chairman Goodlatte, gentlemen, ladies, I appreciate your time and your effort in working to protect the men and women of ICE and the citizens of these so-called sanctuary cities from public officials who have chosen politics, in my opinion, over public safety.
It sounds pretty pessimistic. They are still trying, but feeling like there's a lot of negotiation ahead. One example to highlight that is Fox News has confirmed Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Ohio Senator Rob Portman got into a heated argument this week over Medicaid. That is striking because the two are typically close allies, and any calculation sources have made to get to 50 votes to pass a bill would have to include Portman. McConnell continues urging his colleagues it is time for action.
We know that we cannot afford to delay on this issue. We have to get this done for the American people. That's a sentiment that's widely shared in our conference, and I think I speak for everyone in acknowledging once again that the Obamacare status quo is unacceptable and that it simply cannot continue.
Senate GOP sources say the most likely no votes on health care reform are three people: Susan Collins of Maine, Dean Heller of Nevada, Rand Paul of Kentucky. The problem for leadership is they can only afford 2 Republican no's and still pass a bill.
I still sense that we're at impasse, and I said that yesterday at lunch with our Republican caucus, and everybody kind of laughed because, yeah, there's still quite a bit of disagreement. And there's basically 2 factions.
At this point, I am hearing that senators are due to leave town for the holiday recess later today. Bill?
Wow. Are Democrats hopeful of turning the page on this Republican-led effort? What are they saying, Mike?
Well, they certainly are, Bill, and you've got the Senate's top Democrat essentially calling on President Trump, saying, let's get all 100 senators around the table and talk about your health care priorities.
It would focus about what you, Mr. President, have talked about in your campaign: lower costs, better health care, covering everybody, not on tax cuts for the rich, not on slashing Medicaid.
One top GOP senator told me they took 3 steps forward on health care reform on Tuesday, 2 steps back yesterday. Today, we'll see. Bill?
Well, we shall indeed. Thank you, Mike Emanuel, there on the Hill. There were a few tweets that went out earlier today, and I want you to react to this, okay? This was a suggestion about some folks at MSNBC on a morning program there. Here's what he said. I heard poorly rated Morning Joe, referring to Joe Scarborough, speaks badly of me, don't watch anymore. Then how come low IQ crazy Mika, meaning Mika Brzezinski, the co-host, along with Psycho Joe, came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row during New Year's Eve, around New Year's Eve, and insisted on joining me. She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no. What is the White House saying about why that went out today?
Look, I don't think that the president's ever been someone who gets attacked and doesn't push back. There have been an outrageous number of personal attacks, not just to him, but to, frankly, everyone around him. People on that show have personally attacked me many times. This is a president who fights fire with fire and certainly will not be allowed to be bullied by liberal media and the liberal elites within the media or Hollywood or anywhere else.
I get it, but is that necessary?
Look, I think what's necessary is to push back against unnecessary attacks on the president, both personally. I've seen far worse things come out of that show, again, directed not just at the president, but everyone around him. Personal attacks, mean, hateful attacks. And again, this president isn't going to sit back and not push back, and he's going to fight fire with fire, and I think that's exactly what he did
I've heard
today.
that from you, and I've heard that from him, but it just seems like it is entirely more personal than it needs to be. And I'm wondering if you want to address that.
I think I have addressed that as much as I can in terms of the president, again, isn't going to be somebody who's bullied and allows people himself and those around him to be personally attacked.
He would argue that he's always going to punch back and he's not going to fire the first shot, and perhaps he feels the criticism toward him is unwarranted.
I mean, the outrageous attacks that take place on that show day in, day out, not just at the president and not against his policies, not against things that he's pushing, but they're personal and they're not just directed at him, but again, everyone around him. I've been called a lot of names on that show that don't have anything to do with my beliefs or ideology or policy, but they're personal attacks.
Is there something we need to know more about this relationship?
Not that I'm aware of. I couldn't speak to anything.
There is no
there.
backstory that has not become public that would lead him to choose this wording?
I honestly wouldn't. I'm not aware of any extra backstory on that front.
I have to tell you, this will be a tremendous plan. It will really, you're going to have a lot of very, very happy people in this country if we can get it done. So we're working very hard on health care, and I think we're going to have a great answer, and hopefully we're going to have it soon, and we will keep you informed.
So then there's the latest from the White House from yesterday. The president promising a big surprise on health care. What that is, we don't know. Acknowledging that getting the Republican plan through the Senate will not be easy. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Deputy White House Press Secretary, with me in studio, and nice to see you.
Great to see you
too,
Bill.
Big welcome to your adopted town. Thank you for being here. What's the big surprise?
If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise. That'd be like telling you what you're getting for Christmas before Christmas morning. We couldn't do that.
Does the White House know something that we need to know now?
Look, I think the big piece here is that the president knows that this is something that has to be done. This is something Republicans have been talking about, campaigning on, and frankly, it's becoming something that is just impossible to ignore. Obamacare is simply collapsing around us. You've got states every day that are losing coverage. Carriers pulling out. Nevada is now, I think, 14 counties will be without coverage. That is simply unsustainable and something that we can't allow to continue. I think both Republicans in the House and Senate know this. The president certainly recognizes it. And as we've said all along, never underestimate this president.
Granted, does he believe that he needs to do more in order to push this forward?
I think he's committed to making every effort to get this done, as well as the Senate and House. This is something, again, I think universally recognized that we have to make some big changes and we have to take big and bold steps, and he's committed to doing that.
I know you believe failure is not an option, but the campaign was built on repeal and replace. And now you're facing a moment here, Sarah, where it is very difficult.
I don't think anybody said it would be easy.
Does he need to do his own campaign, perhaps, to convince lawmakers in Congress and the American people that it's going to get there?
I think that's what he's doing right now. He's been, spending significant amount of time. He had all the members of the Republican senators at the White House earlier this week. He's continuing to make calls, do meetings, and work with senators. As we've said, this is going to be a process, but it's one that's important that we go through. We know that there needed to be some changes and that there would be through this process, through this amendments process in the Senate. And that's where we are. Nothing is inconsistent with what we thought would happen, is having this back and forth until we get the right
more
legislation.
Today, right?
I think so.
I mean, what can you share with our audience that he will do in order to contribute to it?
I think he'll continue high-level engagement like he has been, not only personally making calls, taking meetings with individual members, but also engaging members of his administration across the board, whether it's Secretary Price, the Vice President, Seema Verma, a large group of his team are spending.
Can you say today that it will get done?
I think we're committed to making this happen. I think that the American people need it. I'm not in the business of guarantees, but I am certainly, I know that the president has made this a priority, and I've never seen him commit to something like this and not push it through to completion.
Topic 2, there was a warning that went out to Assad the other night about another chemical attack, and apparently it did not happen. Hopefully it will not happen, but there are officials taking credit that suggest that warning prevented Assad from acting. Is that true?
I think that we saw clearly that the intelligence showed there was a need for us to recognize, we were aware something could be taking place, and we saw that it didn't. So we're very hopeful and thankful, like you said, that nothing happened, and we hope that nothing does.
Whether it's a back channel or not, can you say that Assad is listening?
I mean, I don't know how they couldn't be. I think the president's made very clear his intentions, and certainly that this behavior is not acceptable.
On Russia, we had former diplomats at a hearing yesterday. Richard Burr, the Republican from North Carolina, headed up that hearing. When it came to the question of involvement in the election and whether or not Vladimir Putin had a hand in this, this is how the back and forth went on the question and answer.
Do you have any doubt that Russian interference is driven by Putin himself? Start with you, Ambassador Burns.
No doubt about it.
Ambassador?
The same answer, no doubt.
No doubt.
None.
Is there any doubt at the White House?
Look, the president said back in January that he thought that this was probably driven by the Russians. I don't think that we've been quiet or inconsistent on that fact. I think the bigger piece is protecting and making sure things like this don't happen again. That's where our focus is looking at how we can maintain voter integrity moving forward. It's one of the reasons we support voter ID laws and protecting our system across the board.
Well, I get it on voter ID laws, but this is Moscow, and this is Putin. And what are you prepared to say?
And Bill, this is America.
Right. And what are you prepared to say?
We get challenged by them, I think that it's time for America to step up and say, not here, not in our country. And I think that is what we're looking at, is how do we put safeguards in place to make sure things like this don't happen again.
I get it, but what are you actively doing now to make sure that Putin doesn't do it again?
I know that the Department of Homeland Security with cybersecurity teams are looking at the best ways to prevent this every single day, and they're dedicated and focused on nothing other than, not just with the Russians, but anybody. We want to make sure that we protect ourselves and that we're not vulnerable as much as possible, and that's certain people's sole job, is to look at the best ways to do that.
The point being, it's going to happen again.
I think there's always going to be people that are looking to attack Americans in that form, and we have to constantly look for ways to protect ourselves, whether it's through a large number of different tactics on the national security front.
There were a few tweets that went out earlier today, and I want you to get a react to this, okay? This was a suggestion about some folks at MSNBC on a morning program there. Here's what he said. I heard poorly rated Morning Joe, referring to Joe Scarborough, speaks badly of me, don't watch anymore. Then how come low IQ crazy Mika, meaning Mika Brzezinski, the co-host, along with Psycho Joe, came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row during New Year's Eve, around New Year's Eve, and insisted on joining me. She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no. What is the White House saying about why that went out today?
Look, I don't think that the president's ever been someone who gets attacked and doesn't push back. There have been an outrageous number of personal attacks, not just to him, but to, frankly, everyone around him. People on that show have personally attacked me many times. This is a president who fights fire with fire and certainly will not be allowed to be bullied by liberal media and the liberal elites within the media or Hollywood or anywhere else.
I get it, but is that necessary?
Look, I think what's necessary is to push back against unnecessary attacks on the president, both personally. I've seen far worse things come out of that show, again, directed not just at the president, but everyone around him. Personal attacks, mean, hateful attacks. And again, this president isn't going to sit back and not push back, and he's going to fight fire with fire, and I think that's exactly what he did
I've heard
today.
that from you, and I've heard that from him, but it just seems like it is entirely more personal than it needs to be. And I'm wondering if you want to address that.
I think I have addressed that as much as I can in terms of the president, again, isn't going to be somebody who's bullied and allows people himself and those around him to be personally attacked.
He would argue that he's always going to punch back and he's not going to fire the first shot, and perhaps he feels the criticism toward him is unwarranted.
I mean, the outrageous attacks that take place on that show day in, day out, not just at the president and not against his policies, not against things that he's pushing, but they're personal and they're not just directed at him, but again, everyone around him. I've been called a lot of names on that show that don't have anything to do with my beliefs or ideology or policy, but they're personal attacks.
Is there something we need to know more about this relationship?
Not that I'm aware of. I couldn't speak to anything.
There is no
there.
Backstory that has not become public that would lead him to choose this wording?
I honestly wouldn't. I'm not aware of any extra backstory on that front.
We were about to do a segment in a moment with the argument that some former press secretaries, Republican and Democrat alike, are arguing now that the press briefings have become a public show. First of all, do you think that's the case?
I think oftentimes, given that I've seen the difference between the behavior of the press corps, whether it's on camera and off camera, the temperature, the tone definitely comes way down. I think off-camera briefings tend to have a lot more substance than on camera because it does become more about theatrics and the show and the yelling and the gotcha questions. And so I do think that there is a great point and a great part of being able to have a mix of doing both on and off camera.
Suggesting the cameras will stay and will not be turned off permanently?
I don't know that that's ever been suggested. I think since back in December, Sean Spicer was very clear that we were going to look at a lot of different ways to get the president's message out, to promote his agenda, and we're doing that every day, whether it's through the well over 100 million followers the president has on different platforms of social media, whether it's through doing interviews like this, whether it's on camera or off camera briefings, background briefings, and one-on-one conversations with reporters, and again, the president going out and speaking directly to the American people. We're constantly looking for the best ways, and we're going to continue doing that.
Well, I appreciate you being here today at 1-on-1.
Absolutely.
Okay? Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and do we get a briefing today or not?
Yes, sir. We'll be doing a briefing this afternoon on camera.
On camera?
Yes, sir.
Is that with you or Mr. Spicer?
Today you get me, so we'll see how it all goes.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll see you.
You bet.
All right.
So you put a fair amount of work into this bill. It has been shelved for now. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants you to come back with a new proposal tomorrow afternoon. Seems like an ambitious timetable. Will you get it done?
Well, the way I think about it is we've got a base text. We've got a few people who are not comfortable with various provisions, and we're trying to tweak it so that we can hold on to some of our more moderate colleagues on the left side of our spectrum and some of our more conservative colleagues. I do think it's possible. It's not going to be easy. If it were easy, it would have already been done. But I do think it's still possible that we get that agreement.
Well,
it'll be based on the underlying text that already exists.
Senator Susan Collins of Maine, for one, is on record as saying tweaks aren't going to do the job. She wants big changes to the bill.
Well, and in the end, we might not get everyone. But we need 50 out of 52 Republican senators in order to pass this. And that's the goal, and I think that's still possible.
You heard Chuck Schumer there calling for bipartisanship. What's your response?
So let's unpack what Chuck Schumer said. He said, if you're willing, number one, to make sure that Medicaid collapses, you must not do any reforms to create a sustainable program which is currently completely unsustainable. You make sure we keep all kinds of huge tax increases that are costing us jobs and economic growth. Then we'll be willing to bail out the failing Obamacare, if you're willing to do those things. Pretty untenable. The American people have spoken on this many times. They know that Obamacare is failing. We've got to do a better job communicating about what our alternative is. And I should also point out that if we do get legislation done, as I hope we will, it's not going to be complete in the sense that this is going to be an ongoing process. We're using procedures here in the Senate, because the Democrats won't work with us, that narrow our options and don't allow us to do all the things we'd like to do. But it's an important first step to stabilize these collapsing markets, to make some reforms so the premiums can come down, and to put Medicaid on a sustainable path.
Senator Rand Paul says he spoke to the president about splitting the bill in two. One bill that he suggests passing first would essentially repeal the taxes, the regulations, include a Medicaid fix, and then pass a second bill that would involve the spending portions that might get some Democratic support. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the vote count actually works. I'm not sure that the repeal portions by themselves would allow us to get to the 50 votes we need, and surely there wouldn't be a single Democrat voting for it. So, look, I'm glad that Senator Paul is thinking about various options, various ways to get this done. I'm not sure that one works.
The health care program, is one that Americans may not like what's happened under Obamacare, but it's there, and it seems like a lot of people, based on the polls, are scared of change. We talked about this Senate bill getting very little support in a number of polls. How do you sell this plan to American voters?
I think the misinformation from the other side that's been effective. The distortions and the dishonesty, unfortunately, to some degree, has worked. One of the things we need to do is make it clear what this bill is about. For instance, the majority of all Americans get their health insurance from their employer or their spouse or parent's employer. Our bill doesn't touch that at all. So that's a majority of Americans right there. Second big category are the folks who are on Medicare, older Americans who participate in Medicare. Our legislation doesn't touch that at all. It's the very small handful of Americans who buy their insurance through the individual market because they don't get it from their employer and they don't get it from Medicare. And those are the Obamacare exchanges that are in complete collapse. And then it's the poor Americans who are on Medicaid. Those are where we make changes.
Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, thank you.
Thanks
we'll
for
be
having
right
me.
back with more.